right, guys, this is episode 100 of Stone and Clay. I'm just so grateful to be here. On the way over here today, I listened to episode 1, which I don't think I ever listened back to it. And when I first started, I wasn't doing any clips or anything, and so I would just put them out and never really listened to them again because I didn't do much editing. So it was a pretty funny episode where I think I was just trying to be, with every sentence and every moment, I was trying to be clever and funny and interesting instead of just being me, and hopefully letting the cleverness and interestingness and humor come out naturally. So it was kind of funny to go back. If you're a newer listener, we started in the very end of 2019, and the first 3.5 years, I was pretty sporadic with the episodes. The goal was always to do an episode a week and to just keep pumping along. But in those early days, I found getting guests to be a little bit of a difficult task. And yeah, we didn't have a great setup. I was just in my basement filming on my iPhone, with some cheap mics I got on Amazon, just hoping that, I don't know, some people would hear whatever I had to say. And just like any creative thing in the beginning, I don't know that I really had found a voice yet, or really found the strong themes that I wanted to carry on through the podcast. And, from the beginning, I wanted to just talk about life and what it meant to be human, and, things I was passionate about and things my guests were passionate about. But when I first started, like my very first guest, Annie Winters, episode 3, she's just, she's a good friend, but at the time, she was just one of my best friend's little sisters that I didn't even know super well. I just knew she had a great personality, was cute, and interesting. And so I was like, Annie, you want to be on my podcast? She's like, yeah. And so, that was how I got guests back in the day. They were all my friends, and they were just people I wanted to, dig a little deeper with and get to know a little better, or to just have a platform where we could sit down and talk for 2 hours. And so, yeah, it's crazy how 100 episodes later, how things have evolved. And, like any creative thing you're doing, you're never really satisfied. You want it to grow, and you want it to reach people, and you want it to expand, and you want it to become this ever-growing thing that evolves and changes with you. So, we still have a long ways to go. And, it's not like I'm a household name or anything, but I honestly never thought, when I first started, that I'd be where I am today, in a studio with a producer and 100 episodes in, and having, people reach out to me daily telling me how impactful a video was for them, or an episode, or a clip. It's just been beautiful. It's been something that feels like my purpose. And so this episode might be a little bit repetitive because I'm just feeling so grateful. I'm feeling so joyful to sit here and reflect a little bit on what we've been through. I did want to kind of list some of my favorite episodes. I don't think I've ever done this. People ask me all the time, especially the more episodes you get, people are like, where do I start? Which one should I listen to? Which one's your favorite? And the cool thing is, 100 episodes in, there hasn't been a single episode that I didn't like. I could maybe, I won't name who, but I could maybe name you 3, maybe 4 guests that I was kind of like, I don't know that was an especially great episode. I don't know that it was that meaningful to anyone, or that we really got to dig into what I wanted to dig into. And sometimes, a couple of those guests have been a little bit like maybe just personalities I didn't super jive with, that, we had ourselves a good little chat, but we'll probably never really connect again, But for the most part, every single episode, including those 3 or 4, tends to have a nugget or two that sticks with me and that feels impactful and important. And to me, that's just a testament that that's how it should probably be with anyone you talk to, anyone you come in contact with. Like, if you open up your heart to them, and if they're a little bit open to, I feel like you can find common ground. You can find things you're both interested in. You can find beauty in each other. And sometimes you don't love the way it's presented or packaged, but yeah, this has been such a beautiful experience for me. And sometimes it feels like a little bit of a selfish adventure, because I just love these conversations so much. So I'm going to do them regardless of how they're received or how they're viewed. I just love it so much. So yeah, some of my favorite episodes. For a long time, I just had, someone would ask, what episode should I listen to? And I would say, go listen to 75. 75 is with Rachel Winters. I'm sure I've talked about this before, but this was, she's my buddy's wife, and we're really close. And we're really close with my other friend Spencer, and we hang out a lot. We're just extremely close, and it was her second time on the show. I think she was like episode 47 or 48 or something, her first one. But yeah, she came on, and we just talked about life. We talked about heartache and addiction and her love for her husband and our friendship. And I asked her if she had any words of advice for me. And it was one of those conversations that was just so healing. And the cool things we've as friends, we've had conversations like this before, but without a camera, and those conversations are sacred to me. But to capture some of those moments on camera was really special. And I think just because me and Rachel get along so well and we have great conversational chemistry, it just felt like at the time like my best work, like my best episode. And I think it was one of my first like viral videos, that got whatever 300, 400,000 views. And so it was kind of my first experience with a video that really took off like that. That was also really meaningful. It's one thing to have kind of a funny video that pops off. Because people share it, you get new followers, whatever, but it's different when it's a really powerful message. People reach out to you, and the messages you get are different. And so yeah, that episode kind of sparked a light in me and made me realize, maybe this is not the formula, but maybe this is what people need to hear the most, because this is what people are reacting to the most. Another favorite of mine is 91, with James Dallin. He came on and talked about his crazy story of addiction and recovery and the love for his wife. And you'll see there's themes in my episodes. I love to talk about love. I love to talk about relationships. I love to talk about overcoming and resilience. And some guests will go on tangents and we'll talk about other stuff and we'll get into whatever. But yeah, there's some things I always come back to because I think they're important. And yeah, James was such a beautiful guy, and I was just so grateful that he was willing to come on and share that story. And so it was one of those episodes where I honestly didn't talk very much. You know, I had my questions, but his story was just so compelling that I kind of wanted him to just talk. And usually that's not my format. I like a lot of back and forth and asking each other questions and having it be more conversational. But James just had such an epic story. I just had to sit back and listen. Episode 80 with Jake Hansen. That was one of my favorites. Jake is a guy that episode made me realize, I really, really like Jake and really value our friendship and want to be better friends, because I didn't know him super well when we did the episode, but we have a lot of mutual friends and similar interests, and a lot of the guests I've had on, have been mutual friends. But yeah, Jake, I just love how thoughtful he is. I love the way he answers questions. He answers questions lovingly. Like, no matter what the question is, you can feel love emanate from his voice. And he has synesthesia, which is really interesting, and we talked about that. Yeah, I just love that episode. Here's a dark horse episode, a sleeper. And this episode actually bugs me for two reasons. Reason one, he was in town and had very limited time, and I think I had something as well. But anyways, we can record for an hour, and then we gotta be done. And he was performing a song at the end of the episode too, and so we had to set up a little bit for that. So our episode was only 54 minutes or something, and episode 74 with Steven Henderson. But and I had met him the second he walked in the studio, and he was a friend of my producer Tommy's. And from the get-go, Tommy's over here setting up the cameras, and I'm asking Steven some get to know you questions, and he starts tearing up. I'm like, this dude, this is a deep dude I want to talk to for hours, not 50 minutes. And one of the things I'll never forget, and I've seen this now with a couple guests, but one of the questions I asked Steven was, tell me how you met your wife. And he just kind of pauses and starts tearing up before he even answers such an innocuous question. How did you meet your wife? He starts tearing up. To me, that says, she's everything to me. She's my entire world. And to even consider that brings tears to my eyes. To even think about how lucky I got, how blessed I am, brings tears to my eyes. I loved that so much. That could have been the whole episode. And so reason number two why I'm a little frustrated is because for some reason number 74 with Steven Henderson just didn't do very well. It was just one of those episodes that just didn't get a lot of views, didn't get a lot of clicks, and I'm disturbed by it. So if you haven't had a chance, go back and listen to 74. And then, a couple points of trivia. I've only had one guest that has been on 3 times, which is Spencer Schmidt, my dear friend and roommate currently. And he was on, his was pretty spread out. I think his first episode was in the teens. His second one was in the 50s. And his third one was in the 60s or 70s. So, and I'm sure he'll be back on. And then I've had Rachel on twice. And I've actually had 2 girls on that I was kind of dating at the time, but we'll keep that between me and the guests. The thing is, if you're sneaky clever, I feel like if you listen to the episodes, you can feel that there's something there, something's going on. But to be fair, the first one we had kind of been on and off a little bit, and she came over and always wanted to be a guest on the podcast, and she had some cool things to talk about, and so we were kind of off at that point, but it was very flirtatious and yeah, it's funny. At the time, like I said, I'm recording in my basement, and so our chairs are like super close together. She has a blanket on her lap. Our knees are basically touching. Like, if you could see the video, you'd see that something's going on. And then another girl I really, really liked at the time I had on, and I think, so we recorded super late at my place. I think we started the episode at like midnight or 1 a.m., something crazy. And then we hung out afterward, and that was the first night that we like held hands and cuddled and stuff, and then we kind of dated for a bit. So kind of interesting. That's never my MO, like, hey, let's have some girls on and then maybe I can date them, but both these girls I had already known. All right, guys, I wanted to answer some questions. Had a lot of people ask a lot of things, and I wanted to preface this by saying, because I've done this a handful of times, I like to do this on my solo episodes, but I want these questions to be about whatever people feel like they need help with, or they're curious about, or they just need, sometimes you ask a question and you kind of know the answer, but you want some validation, or you want to hear it from somebody you trust or somebody you believe in. And so the thing is, so many of these questions I feel like I've answered in some form or another on a previous episode, but I think they're worth revisiting. And they're all worded differently, they're all unique experiences, but it's crazy how, as I go through these questions, it's crazy how universal some of these issues are and how common some of these points of pain are. And so I want to address them. I want to get into it. And I guess the main caveat I have is, a lot of people are going through things that I haven't gone through. I talk a lot about pain and healing and depression and getting out of sadness and finding hope and a lot of these things, but I've had a pretty good life, but we all have things that kind of peck at our souls and kind of wear us down over years, and we all have things that cause tremendous amounts of pain, and I don't think it's helpful or necessary to compare your pain with others, or to feel sad that, I think sometimes you feel guilty or sad that you feel so sad because so many people have it way worse than you. But, and maybe that's a reason to be grateful that you have things better than other people, but there's no reason to try to minimize your pain or what you're going through, because, we all go through it, and it's all, all of our experiences and things we've been through lead us up to that point. And so we're able to deal with it in different ways. And so there might be some person that, has a terrible fatal illness, and they've been through hell in their life, and they're, maybe they've lived in a war-torn country, and they've been a refugee, and they've dealt with, starving, and they've dealt with violent death, and they've dealt with disease, but for some reason their disposition and what they've been through and their support and their brain and their constitution, for some reason, maybe they've been able to deal with that better than what you're going through. And that doesn't make you a worse person. That's just life. People deal with things in different ways. And so, um, like I said, a lot of these questions, um, I talk a lot about my own personal heartbreak and not having a family and not having the love I want to have and dealing with breakups. And I talk about these things sort of ad nauseum, but a lot of my comments and messages I get, it'll be from women that say like, well, I'm in my mid 40s and now I can't have kids, and still waiting for that love and still waiting for a family that maybe will never come. And then I get people messaging me saying, I've always wanted a family, but now I'm sick, and now I don't think that'll ever happen for me. And so, when people hear me talk about my problems, I don't want them to think that I think my life is horrible or it's a sad thing. I love my life, and there's so many things in my life that bring me joy and things that I'm grateful for, but I think it's important to talk about your pain and talk about things that you want to improve and you wish you had, and to not take your feelings and just bury them in the ground. And so anyway, I'm going to hop into this, answer some of these questions. And like I said, a lot of these questions are fairly similar, but I think they're important. And I'll tell you what, somebody asked me the other day on one of my solo episodes how long it takes to prep. And I said, I don't prep. I basically read through these, make sure, there's a couple kind of silly, ridiculous questions I'm not going to answer. There's a couple that literally ask the same thing twice. There's a couple that I don't really understand what they're asking. There's one that their English isn't great, so I really don't know what they're trying to ask. But for the most part, I don't sit and think about what I'm going to say. I want these to be kind of authentic responses, and I might get a little stumped too. Okay. The first one says, at what point do you realize the reality of being single and settle for love that just comes along? For me, the answer is never. There's not a point where I decide to settle and I decide, well, I hate being single so much that I'm just going to pick somebody. I'm just going to decide to love someone because they're here and because it feels like my last option. It feels like the last chopper out of Saigon. For me personally, and that's the thing, I'm trying to answer these personally, what I would do, what I think's correct, but that doesn't mean that is what's correct. But I do think if you're not looking to self-improve and become a better version of yourself and to forgive yourself and work on your talents and work on your career and work on your fitness and all these different things, then I think you have to settle, because you can't expect to find a partner that is amazing and is excelling in all these different areas if you're not trying to do the same. So I think if you're like, yeah, I'm good, I'm not going to work on myself, people need to love me as I am, then maybe it's time to settle. But for me, as someone who's attempting to grow and attempting to work on myself at all times, and also someone who has tasted of great love and knows that it exists and knows that it's out there and knows that it's very possible and very much within my reach, there's not a point where I decide to settle. I'm not going to do it. Next question. What is your peace? For me, there's a lot of different things that bring me peace, but I do think peace is really important. That feeling, that state of being. And I think there are times in my life when there's some emotional turmoil where I just can't seem to find peace. I feel like there's chaos in my brain. I feel like I'm just unsettled. I'm restless. I'm uneasy, you know? And for me, I find peace in God. I find peace in friendships and relationships. I find peace in purpose. I find peace in, the outdoors, the beauty of clouds and sunlight. There's so many things that bring me peace, but I do think it's a practice. I think you have to pursue peace, and you have to go find it and try to find a way to hold on to it too. But I think peace is like happiness. It comes and goes, and it ebbs and flows and fades and evanesces. And I think when it's here and there's peace in your home and there's peace in your heart, you just be grateful, and you bask in it, and you soak in it, and you thank your maker for it. And know that, like happiness, it's just not going to be there all the time, and that's okay. And that's how life is. And no one said life will always be peaceful and life will always be happy, and if not, something's wrong. You can't. How can you have peace all the time? If people around you are hurting all the time, which they are, how can you have peace all the time? To me, there's little valleys and oases where peace is there, and things are calm, and everyone's healthy around you, and everyone is doing pretty well. And of course, people have their demons, the things they're struggling with, but there are periods of peace, and you have to appreciate them, but know that they come and go. Learning to be content with where you're at versus what you want, and trusting the process. I've talked about this before, but I think a recipe for unhappiness is not being content with where you are. And that's really hard. That's why it's hard to be happy, because, when you're younger, it's funny, you're always looking like it's really hard to enjoy middle school because you want to be in high school. You want to be older and cooler. And, you see, if you play sports, you see kids playing varsity sports, and it's exciting, and there's cheerleaders around, and it's a different energy than middle school. And middle school feels so barely removed from elementary school, but, now you have lockers or whatever. Things are different. And I wish as a kid you could just enjoy middle school and be like, and I know middle school's hell for a lot of people, but I enjoyed it, But I wish I wasn't so just thinking about the next few years of my life. I wish I could have just lived in that moment a little more and been like, man, I will never be in 7th grade again. I will never sit by Shelby in math class ever again. I will never have Mr. Woodward as a history teacher ever again, But we do this as adults too. We obsess over the next phase of life, and it's so hard to be content when you're single, because you want to be with somebody and you want that love, and when you get that, the next step is maybe to have children, and then this one kind of breaks my heart, and I won't speak too much to it because I'm not in their position, but for somebody that wants these things so badly, and it's kind of a source of a decent amount of pain that I don't have children yet. When I hear people talk about how they can't wait for their kids to leave the house, and they can't wait for their kids to be 18 and to be gone, I'm like, that's not the way to live. And I get sometimes it's tongue in cheek, and you know, they know that maybe once the kids leave, there will be some peace. You know, things will be more calm in their home, and they can travel more and they can retire and relax. But why can't they just live in that vanishing moment, you know, those tender years? But we all do it. You know, it's really, really hard to be content and to trust the process. But I think it comes back to mindfulness and being present and being grateful. You know, these are, again, these are themes I always come back to because I think they're essential. I think they're imperative. I think without gratitude, you're going to be miserable. I think without mindfulness, you're going to be in a state of discontent. I just do. Do you think people regret leaving a good person who they admitted will love them more than anyone? Yes and no. You know, that depends. I think a lot of time love, you know, slips by you, and what could have been an amazing relationship sort of dissipates, and I think depending on your stage in life and what you want and your priorities, sure, you can regret that. And sometimes, you know, a lot of times people realize it was a mistake, or realize that it hurts their heart so much to be without that person, but a lot of times it's too late. And, you know, sometimes you're young when you meet someone, and you take it for granted. You don't realize that kind of love doesn't grow on trees. You know, you don't realize that you can't really have that connection with everyone, you know, especially when you're, you know, a charming, loving person. You know, sometimes love comes easy to people. You know, sometimes, yeah, for whatever reason, some people do way better with dating and with relationships, and it comes easy to them. And so when they find love early and find a deep connection early, sometimes they take it for granted because they think, oh, like, I've always done well with the opposite sex, this will come again. I'm not ready to date, or I'm not ready to settle down, or you know, something really superficial. This person's great, but I wish they were a little taller, or I wish they made a little bit more money, or I wish they wanted to live in Florida, and that's, you know, that's where I want to live, and they want to live in the Midwest, you know. But I think for most people, there'll come a time when they realize that really special, sacred connection is super, super rare. And so I do think people regret leaving a good person who they admitted will love them more than anyone. But that's not always true, because it's not always about how much someone loves you. It's also a lot about compatibility, and you know, it's not just how much somebody loves you, but it's how much you love them. You know, it can't be one-sided. And so, you know, I've had girls that I think would have loved me more than anyone, but it's not really fair to stay with them just for that reason. You know, that's not a reason to be with somebody. It's part of a reason, and it's a great thing to have, but it's not the reason to be with somebody. One thing an ex-love said that will stick with you forever, good and or bad. That's a good question. Wow. I think one of my exes, she just believed in my writing so much. And I've brought this up before, but when she broke up with me, she asked me if I had been writing, you know, because we kind of ended things and didn't see each other for a couple of weeks, and then had, a horrible final conversation, where we got everything on the table. And so we hadn't seen each other in a couple of weeks. And she asked me, she's like, have you been writing? And I was like, no, I haven't been able to, haven't felt like it, haven't had the gumption to, revisit these feelings. And I think she knew that my best writing came from that dark place, or came from a feeling of great emotion, whether positive or negative. And she just kind of told me, like, you should write. You're going through all these things, like, you should write. And that stuck with me. And that was a really, really painful breakup, and still is a little bit to this day. But yeah, that really stuck with me. Well, this is an interesting question. This sounds like something personal someone's going through. It says, the purest love turned unrequited. How? Was it just lust that was mistook for love? Now, obviously, I need about 30 other pieces of information to make a good response here. But, when love feels pure and it ultimately becomes unrequited, yeah, you're left really confused. And I think it happens all the time. And I think sometimes I think a lot of times it's not that you're confused or you're delusional, but I do think sometimes you mistake love for a little bit of fantasy. It feels like love because if it turned into that love, it would be everything you wanted, right? That person has all the qualities you want. They have the personality that lights you up. They have the looks that you're deeply attracted to. They have the job that's interesting and enticing. They have an amazing family, whatever it is. Sometimes that person feels like an idea and a fantasy, and this bubble of hope is built. And when that love sort of goes in the drain, it's easy to feel really destroyed. And it's easy to ask yourself, like, was I clueless this whole time? I thought we had something magical. But I think sometimes a part of that magic is the fantasy. And sometimes lust can be a part of that fantasy. When you're deeply, deeply attracted to somebody, it fogs your brain a little bit. And when it's reciprocated and you have all the other elements as well, it's a great thing. And that fog is fine. That fog is kind of that, that new love when you're around a couple that you're talking to them and they can't even hear you. They're just in their own world. Like, that's part of the fog. But when it's one-sided, that's when it's bad, or when that's all there is. When it's just physical, that fog can be confusing and can be mistaken for love. How do you cope with feelings of both love and resentment for someone? That's a good question. I do think the two things can exist. I think it happens all the time with family and friends and romantic partners. I think the key is you can't sit in resentment very long. There's going to be moments all the time where let's take a spouse or boyfriend or girlfriend. If you're spending a lot of time together, if you live together, there's going to be probably moments almost every single day that you resent that person a little bit for. And, if you have a really beautiful, evolved relationship, I think a lot of things that you might otherwise find annoying or cumbersome with someone else, you find endearing and cute with the person that you love, but there's still so many opportunities for that person to bug you a little bit. Maybe they're just their little idiosyncrasies. Maybe they are, maybe when they're in a really bad mood, they're hard to be around, and you get a little bit resentful. But I think it's okay to be resentful, but you can't sit in it. You have to find a way to relinquish the resentment and to seek peace and seek, that feeling where you guys come together and get rid of those feelings. So I don't think it's easy, but I think when you love someone and resentment starts to enter your heart, that's when you go and you talk to them. And that's it. And it could be a huge problem, a huge issue, or it could be something really small, but I think there's nothing too small to address. And I think there are cases where, somebody you love does something, I won't say unforgivable, because I don't really believe in that word, but does something where you decide you need to draw some lines in the sand and have some boundaries and maybe not be around that person so much. Maybe it's a sibling, or maybe it's an uncle, maybe it's someone in your friend group that you love, but you just can't really be around anymore. And I think if you want to be around them, you have to get rid of that resentment for that relationship to continue and to thrive. But if you decide you can't be around them for your own good and your own mental health, I still think you need to get rid of the resentment, or it'll poison your soul. I really do. But that doesn't mean you need to spend time with them, because maybe their behavior has shown you that they'll hurt you again and they will continue to misbehave. But again, if that resentment remains, you're the one that's going to suffer. So yeah, coping with feelings of both love and resentment for someone, it's tough, but you gotta figure it out. You can't just decide to resent somebody that you love all the time and not do anything about it. It's just burying your head in the sand. What would you say to a friend who keeps falling back into old habits, stunting their growth? Oh man, that's really tough. This really depends on your relationship with that person. Hopefully, if it's a dear friend, you have the kind of relationship where you could say something. But also, you would hope that based on that relationship, your friend already knows how you feel about their bad habits or their addictions or their struggles. But ultimately, a person has to decide for themselves, right? And it's a spectrum. If someone's falling back into the old habit of eating too many carbs because they're trying to diet and they're trying to stay on this strict, regimen, and they've made it known to their friend group they want to avoid carbs or whatever, and they've fallen back, that compared to, someone falling back into heroin or falling back into an abusive relationship, like those things are worlds apart. So it's hard to give just one, concise answer to this. But I think ultimately it just has to be done with love and without judgment and condescension. I think, when you really love someone and you go and talk to them, they should be able to just feel love. And maybe it is something really serious and it's an addiction, and you approach them and say, listen, I'm not perfect. I got my own things I deal with, my own bad habits. But I just want you to know that, like, I love you, and it breaks my heart to see you doing this, or I just want, I don't want to chastise you. I don't want to scold you. I want you to know that I'm here to help, and I'm here to be a support system, and I'm here if you need to vent, and if you need advice, I'll give it to you. But most people don't want unsolicited advice. So go to them with love, and if they're ready to receive it, then they'll kind of make it known that they're open for advice, that they're open for help. But if people aren't ready, they're not ready. And that's what causes a lot of broken hearts, are people that have fallen back into old habits and are not open to change, not open to avoiding these habits. So it's hard, but like I said, it's a spectrum. So you gotta figure out what your relationship is with that person, and decide how comfortable you can be with them, and having these conversations. But ultimately, it has to be with love, or you're not going to get anywhere. Okay, this is another question that this is obviously just something somebody's going through. They said, after 5 years of being single, will I ever find love? Well, I don't know. I don't know you, and I'll tell you what, from my own experience, 5 years isn't that long. It can seem like a lifetime, but I think love is a curious, mercurial thing. But I think if you're a loving person and you love yourself and you love other people and you are self-aware and self-honest, I think you'll find love. I think the people that are doomed to maybe not find love, and that sounds horrible, and I also don't think anyone is truly doomed, but I think the people that are most likely to not find love are people that refuse to work on themselves and refuse to look themselves in the mirror, and there's a million things that we could all work on, but if you just decide, this is how I am, this is how I'll always be, I'm not changing for anybody, it might be really hard to find love. And like I said earlier, you might need to find ways to settle, but I don't think you should be overly discouraged by having a long period of being single, because to me that just means your love hasn't arrived yet. You haven't met your person. But I do think it's important to self-evaluate, maybe ask yourself, why have you been single so long? Has it been, try to look for patterns. Has there been a lot of failed relationships or a lot of failed attempts at relationships? Has dating, have you not dated in 5 years? Or if you just haven't had luck with dating in 5 years? And if so, why? And sometimes it's just bad luck. It's you literally haven't met the right person yet, and you've met the wrong people. And now, having met those wrong people, much better what the right person looks like. And so a lot of times those 5 years of singleness and pain are actually essential, because they teach you what you actually need, and they remind you, like, what an appropriate kind of love actually is. So I wouldn't overly stress out about that. Here's a nice personal one for me. It says, no one's knocking on your door for love. You're a catch. Is there a barrier up? I don't think so. I don't think there's a barrier up. I think you know, I think some people are knocking on my door, and listen, I'll look through the people, I'll see who it is, and I might even answer it. I might even open the door, might even let you in a little bit. But yeah, I just have really specific things I'm looking for, and those specific things, most of them can be tied up in personality and connection. So you can say I'm overly picky. I probably am, but I think that's a good thing. I think you have to be picky with the most important decision of your life, right? People are certainly picky about choosing a college, choosing a career, choosing a house, a car. People are insanely picky. So to be flippant about choosing a life partner is wildly risky in my mind. Man, these questions. I said, ask me a question about life, love, whatever, and people honed in on love. So this person says, do you think love really goes away even if you marry another? I don't know. That's a really interesting question. I think, and this is just my opinion, I don't really know what to make of this idea. In fact, I remember I was dating a girl when I was like 22, 23, and she was telling me about her first love and one of her ex-boyfriends, and I think they ended on good terms or whatever, but she's like, yeah, but I'll always love him. And I was like, what? And I really liked her at the time, so I was like, I'm not gonna make this an issue, but I just disagree. Like, I don't think you can still love this guy, if you love somebody new. But as I've had my own relationships and loves, I think, depending on the person and how it ended and how your connection was, I think sometimes that love can permeate forever, but it's different. It changes. And as you meet somebody new, as you marry somebody new, like how that love is manifested and how it's, how it lives in the ether is different. And I think it just becomes a little thing that is a little bit existent in your heart. And I think that's okay. And I think you can have love for someone without being in love with them, romantically. It can just be like, yeah, I'll always love that person, but they're not my person anymore. They're not the person I love more than anything. They're not the person that I would do anything for, but they're somebody I loved, and that love still kind of exists somewhere in some way, and I think that's okay. But I think it has to be appropriate and has to be managed in the right way. And I think if you're kind of still in love with an ex and you're in a current relationship, I think that's a recipe for disaster. But I think you can have an ex and be like, yeah, like I still have love for that person. Like if we met today, we might not even date, but I care about that person. I want the best for them. I love them. And maybe it becomes just more a platonic love, It becomes, yeah, I love that person as a human being, but they're not my human being anymore. Being on a healing journey feels lonely when mostly surrounded by people who are not on a similar path. Yeah, I think that's probably true, but I also think more than you realize, people are probably on healing journeys, and maybe you're doing way more to address your healing, and it's way more apparent and public, and you're way more open and honest about it. But I think we're all healing certain parts of us, and maybe the issue, maybe why it feels so lonely is because you've surrounded yourself with people that aren't as open, aren't as deep as you, don't feel as much as you, and don't want to open those crags and open those old wounds and explore why they've caused so much pain. And so I do think it can be lonely, but I think you can also try to surround yourself with people that are like-minded and also want to heal and want to help you heal. And like I said, I don't know what you're specifically healing. Maybe it's really, really bad and it's hard to talk about and you feel like no one else understands. And so that is especially lonely. But yeah, I think the more you get to know people and let people in and the more vulnerable you are, the more you'll realize that, man, everyone's going through something and everyone has something that they could heal from a little bit. And so how do you deal with the void in a way that helps keep the optimism? This is something I literally talked about on my last episode, where I said I felt like so much of the pain in my heart is from the void of not having certain things, not having love, not having a family yet. These things that kind of just, it's kind of this emotional woodpecker at my heart that's, kind of a constant jabbing, but it's not fatal, but it's there. And it's, when you're busy and you're having other things in life that are fulfilling, it kind of fades and you get used to the pecking at your heart. But when things slow down and there's stillness, you remember, oh yeah, somebody's jabbing at my heart. And so I think it is difficult to be optimistic when there's constant pain or there's a constant void. But that's why I think this is something I preach all the time. That's why I think it's essential to pursue joy and purpose in many, many areas of life. I think hobbies are really important. I think finding little things you're passionate about are really important. Maybe it's food. Maybe it's a magazine you love. Do people still read magazines? I don't. Maybe it's an anime. A lot of my friends are obsessed with anime. I couldn't begin to be interested in anime, but I actually love that they're passionate about it. I'm actually in an anime group text just because people threw me in there to troll me. But they're some of my best friends, so I'm like, I'm staying. I love how passionate you guys are about this. And I razz them and, I give them crap. But I love people that are passionate about stuff, even if it's really trivial, inconsequential stuff. I love shows. I love movies. I love, certain influencers on social media. Like, I think it's important to have things that bring you a lot of joy. And it helps mitigate the pain. It really does. It helps sort of numb that constant jabbing at your heart when you have other sources of joy and other sources of fulfillment. And then when that void is filled, your life will be so otherwise complete that will actually bring you everlasting joy, and it won't just be a brass ring you're chasing. We got a lot of these, don't we? That's okay. We're gonna haul through. Why is it that sometimes, even though you have faith, having faith can feel like a burden? I never thought about that. How faith can feel like a burden. I guess the temptation is when things are really difficult and your faith feels maybe like it's in vain or like it's just too much to bear. I can see how the temptation is to throw faith out the window and to just lean on your own understanding and to just lean on, worldly views. And, if it was me, if I discarded faith completely, I think my main pursuit would be pleasure. And pleasure can be a very selfish pursuit. I don't think it's intrinsically a bad thing, but I think if that's all you're seeking, it can turn evil on you, and it can be your greatest vice. But yeah, like I said, for me, if I discarded faith, I think that would be my default. Okay, eliminate faith, that means you eliminate hope, which means you're pretty nihilistic probably, which means nothing really matters. Nothing really has eternal consequence. So why not seek pleasure? Even though I know, empirically speaking, that just seeking pleasure will ultimately bring me pain. That's what I want right now, so that's what I'm going to do. And maybe, I'll do some other things that are altruistic and bring me joy, but pleasure will probably be number one, So I understand that sentiment that faith can feel like a burden, but it's not really something I struggle with. I think faith, to me, is the opposite of a burden. To me, having faith makes my life lighter. It makes it easier to bear. It makes it less burdensome. But that's just me. How do you find an appetite for life once you've lost it? That's a heartbreaking question. I think you have to approach it like anything else. Like peace, like happiness. An appetite for life will come and go, and sometimes, it changes in size all the time. Sometimes your appetite for life is enormous, and you want to do things, and you want to pursue new skills and new relationships, and you want to embrace things, and you want to touch life. And there are times where things feel gray and things feel abysmal, and you don't have an appetite for life. You don't have an appetite for anything. You can barely get out of bed. You can barely get through the day. You can barely stomach going to work, and you can barely stomach, the quotidian tasks of adult life, paying your bills, doing laundry. You can barely get through it. So how can you have an appetite for life? But I think my counsel would be that none of these states are permanent, whether positive or negative. So you have to find a way to ride them out and to weather the storm, and understand that if you don't have an appetite for life, there's nothing wrong with you. You're just in a dark period. You're in a storm. And so it might be a really long storm, but you have to find ways to try and get out of the storm, And if you think about, let's think about this literally. If you're in a terrible, violent storm, there's scary, ominous clouds, there's wind, it's raining, there's thunder, there's lightning, maybe there's even a tornado coming up over the hill. Maybe there's hail, maybe it just feels, it's so, the winds are so heavy, maybe it feels like I don't have a way out of this, I'm not going to make it. But if you can just head in the opposite direction of the storm, or even go with the storm, eventually you'll be out of it. And everyone's storm lasts, a different amount of time, but I think if you don't have an appetite for life, you have to realize that the appetite will return. Just like when you're sick and you're depressed and you don't have an appetite at all, and eating sounds nauseating, and it feels like an odious task that you're just not interested in. Eventually the appetite returns, and joy returns, and faith returns. So yeah, I think things in life you just have to you have to accept, okay, you know what? Right now, I am deeply depressed. I am deeply saddened. I'm mourning. Whatever you're going through, you have to realize I'm not going to be in this state forever, And it's hard while you're in that state, especially when you feel like, I didn't think it was going to last this long. I thought I'd be better by now. I thought I wouldn't be openly weeping in public anymore. I thought I wouldn't be resentful anymore. I thought I wouldn't be sick anymore. But you'll get out of it. The tides will change and things will get better. And sometimes, here's the reality. Here's the tragic reality about life. Sometimes your storm you don't get out of because it's the final chapter of your life. That's, what do you say to somebody that's dying? You'll get out of this storm? No, you're not. Like, this is the final storm, but the storm wasn't your whole life, and if you're a person of faith and you believe in some sort of divine, paradise and afterlife that is, a source of faith, then I would argue, yeah, your storm won't be forever. And this last chapter that feels so tumultuous and feels like a violent windstorm, yeah, that's how things ended here, but that's not the end of your story. So that's just how I feel. Maybe it feels like, okay, easy for you to say, or, okay, but I don't have faith. I'm sorry. That's just how I feel. But that is a heartbreaking question. How do you find an appetite for life once you've lost it? It's not easy. It's not easy. How do you become okay with waiting for a love that may never come? This is a very adjacent question to some things we've already talked about. And I'm gonna go back to what I was saying before, where someone asking, "Will I ever find love?" I think you have to self-assess. You have to decide, am I a catch? Am I somebody that is easy to love? Am I somebody that has things to offer? If not, that doesn't mean I'm unlovable and I'm worthless, but that does mean I have things to work on. And maybe it would be easier to find love if I worked on those things, And that doesn't mean if you work on those things, the next week you're going to be in a loving, beautiful, enriching relationship, but it sure opens doors. And, I think if someone was waiting for love that they thought would never come, I think your only option is to work on yourself and become your best version of yourself and to love yourself. And then all of a sudden you become a very attractive human. And I think love will come easier. And so I don't think there's anyone on earth that I would point to and say, love will never come for you. It's not coming. There's no chance. I think you can find, even someone that is, could be described as a wretched human, someone deplorable, someone not especially loving, somebody that deeply struggles with a lot of things, there's an analog to you. There's another person of the opposite sex that is also deplorable, that is also difficult to be around. So those people can for sure find each other, but I think the better option is to become a better version of yourself, and then you don't have to settle for somebody with all those weaknesses. All of a sudden you have more options. So I do think everyone has love out there for them, that exists somewhere, that will come to them if they're willing to maybe sacrifice a little, maybe become a little bit of a better person. This is a great question. I love how it's phrased. Where you live? I live in Utah, in a city called Provo, in Utah County, also known as Happy Valley. Man, I still got a lot to go through. I'm going to try to speed this up. How do you find peace in times where you have so much sadness in life? I've talked a lot about peace. I think you have to find it in small doses and in small, unique places. I think if you're going to a restaurant, try to find peace there. If you're going grocery shopping, try to find peace in the grocery store. If you're going for a walk and you're stressed and you're listening to music, try to find peace. Peace doesn't erase sadness, but it can for sure mitigate it, and it can for sure make it easier to bear. What helps you find meaning? There's thousands of things, There's books, there's music, there's friends, there's knowledge, there's education, there's purpose, there's God, there's my parents, there's my nieces and nephews, sports. I could just list off things in my life that are important to me, and those things help me find meaning. Some of these questions are so similar to each other. I'm not gonna answer all of these. This person said, how do I become okay with getting older and not finding my life partner? It's the same question as, what if I never find love? How do I find peace? I think you have to find ways in life to be happy and find joy, even if you don't have the things you want. But in the meantime, you also work on the things you want. You do everything in your power, and you control the controllables. And you do everything. If you want a life partner more than anything, what are you doing, to show that that's what you want more than anything, or is it just a fantasy? If that's the thing you want the most, what are you doing to get that thing? That's my question. Oh, this question. I read this earlier and didn't even know what to think. I don't know if I have an answer. It says, I have 2 sons, 16 and 17. My partner left, and I'm fighting cancer. What advice would you give? Man, I would say this. It feels like anything I say is going to sound hollow, because I haven't been through that. I don't have kids. I don't have a partner that just left me. I certainly don't have cancer. I would just say, in moments like this where everything starts to build up and it feels like your life is a tragedy instead of a comedy, I would say the only thing you can do is to hold to the things you are grateful for. And the things that are tragic and catastrophic, realize that that's, you know, those aren't punishments. Those aren't things you're receiving just because you have bad luck or because you're an unworthy human. That's just the nature of life. Sometimes life hands you trash in triplicate, you know. They always say, bad things happen in threes, and sometimes it's true. But I would say just hold on to your sons. I don't know how serious your cancer is. I don't know how heartbreaking it was when your partner left, but I would just hold to your two sons and be the strength for them. Maybe you don't have strength. Maybe you feel the weakest that you've ever felt, but be strong for your sons. That's the only advice I have. But my heart, my heart bleeds. My heart goes out to you. One of my buddies, Ryan, asked, "Can you still sea walk?" Yes, I can. If you don't know what sea walking is, look it up. I can do it. I learned I think when I was 12 or 13. What would you choose before 35 years old? A family first, then career, or career, then family? I think that depends on the person, but I think, I think you pursue what you want and what your heart is chasing, but I think it doesn't need to be one or the other, I think if you find someone you love, I don't think you put a family on hold for your career. And if you have a family and have a career, I don't think you put your career on hold for your family. I think you find a way to have both things and to have balance. And I think being overly obsessed with career, I think you'd ultimately regret that if it affects your family or your future family. And I think if all you care about is spending time with your family and making a family and finding a partner, and you completely neglect your career, I think you'll regret that too. So I think you just live your life, and sometimes a career will come later, sometimes a family will come later, and some of those are a little bit out of your hands. So I think you just pursue what's important to you. Oh man, these questions they're tugging at the old heartstrings. It says, do you think the inner battle ever goes away, or do we just get better at fighting it? It depends on your inner battle. I think sometimes we get so good at fighting it that it kind of goes away. It kind of just becomes a part of our DNA, and our struggle becomes, just almost an eccentricity that we have. It becomes, just a footnote in our story. It doesn't become our whole story. But a lot of people, their inner battle overtakes them, and it consumes them, and they become the victim, and they become their struggle. And the fight is so difficult that they lay down and surrender. And so I'm not saying it's easy, but I think those are your two choices. Ooh, this is a tricky question. If you were in a room with everyone you've ever met, who would you look for? Now, I've heard this question on the internet before, and I think what people want the answer to be is the person you're in love with, the one that got away, the person that you pined for the most. But I don't know. I don't know the answer. It feels impossible to really truly conjure up that thought, I think my brain would go haywire. I'd be like, oh, I want to see, I had a friend in, what was it like? probably 5th and 6th grade that was like my best friend. And then he just moved one summer and I never heard from him again. And I've looked for him on social media. He has a really common name. I have no idea where he is or what he's doing. I would love to see him. I would love to find him in that room. But I would also love to see, my grandma that passed away. I would love to see my little sister that I haven't seen in months. I would love to see an old coach, from when I was a kid. There's a lot of people, so that's an amazing question. I don't think I have a really good answer for it. Okay, this is another really good question I've never considered, which is really impressive. It says, if you were given a box of everything you've ever lost, what would you look for? That's hard. I don't think I've had anything really tragic that I've lost, something really sentimental that really broke my heart. There's a lot of clothes that I have just vanished that, not a big deal. They're probably out of style now. It almost bugs me that I couldn't ever find them, Man, I don't know. That's such a good question. I guess I'm grateful there's nothing that just comes to mind that I lost. I'd love to see that box though. What advice do you have for dealing with the hurt from bad behavior in dating, like ghosting? If ghosting is the worst thing you've dealt with, you've got it pretty good. But I think a lot of here's my main advice. I think it's tough when you've been burned and you've had maybe some toxic relationships or some bad behavior or whatever. I think the worst thing you can do is become embittered and start to think that, if you're a guy, to start to think that women are the problem. Or, if you're a girl, to think that men are the problem. I think you'll always run into some people that do you dirty. And unfortunately, a lot of people have tendencies to get into bad relationships, and sometimes they don't have great examples and they don't have high standards, and people have a lot of reasons why they put up with crap, and they deal with abuse and they deal with inappropriate behavior, and a lot of it comes from a lack of self-love and what they think they deserve. But ultimately, the advice on how do you deal with that hurt is hard. You just have to do the work. You have to find ways to heal and find ways to realize that someone ghosting you has nothing to do with you. It has everything to do with their inability to communicate, with their inability to properly express an emotion that should be expressed. And that sucks. And it's hard to not take personally, because you're like, oh, I bet they wouldn't ghost this person, or, I bet if I was this, or this, I wouldn't have been ghosted. But I don't know that that's the case. I think you were just with someone that is okay with ghosting, So I think sometimes you have to take the onus off of you and realize that if you've been treated poorly, it's probably just because you're with somebody that treats people poorly. And then you have to address, why would I end up with somebody like that? But a lot of people can trick you and can be snakes in the beginning. And so unfortunately, sometimes there's a learning curve to what kind of people are toxic and what kind of people will drag you down and what kind of people suck your energy. And so I think you have to learn what that looks like. And yeah, the main thing is you can't become embittered. That will not help you. That will make you a worse version of yourself. But yeah, I look at myself and listen, there's been plenty of girls that have ghosted me, that have what I felt like they led me on, or I felt like they were cruel in how they ended things, or I felt like they were emotionally reckless. But I'll tell you what, I've never been in a toxic relationship. I've never been in a relationship where I felt consistently mistreated, or I felt like there was repetitive bad behavior, because I won't put up with it. I'm not dealing with that. That's not okay. And so yeah, you can be treated poorly by anyone, but don't, if you see a pattern, you gotta go. You gotta go the opposite direction. Do you ever feel excluded from groups because you aren't in a relationship? No, I don't. I think my groups that I associate with are very inclusive, and sometimes I feel sad if I'm the one single person, hanging out with a bunch of married people, but that's on me. That's not them being exclusive. That's me just being like, oh, I'm around these great things. I don't have these great things. So I feel a certain sadness, and that's okay. But yeah, if you're hanging around people that make you feel excluded, I guess you have to ask yourself, is it me that's just projecting my emotions, or are they actually kind of being exclusive? And if that's the case, then see ya, Similar question. This is by the same person, actually. Is it hard for you when friends get married or have babies and you aren't in the season yet? I would say I'm so used to it at this point that it's not especially difficult. I think there are just random moments where, and to me, it's only like if I go to a wedding, and I've been to a million weddings. And so if I go to a wedding and I see a couple that I'm like, man, they have it. They have something beautiful. They have something I would love to have. Not necessarily, that person. It's not feelings of jealousy, but it's like they have something pure and something that I would want some version of it, man. They have it. It's magnetic. You can feel it. It's not it's not forced. It's authentic. It's genuine. Sometimes when I see that and can sense it, sometimes that hurts the heart a little bit because you want it so bad. And all babies will get me sometimes. Yeah, sometimes I'll be hanging around my nieces and nephews, and it kind of hits me in a little wave, and it makes me a little sad because I'm like, dang it, dude. I want to be a dad, I want to do these things, and I want to have this moment with my kid, and I want to teach him, and I want to hold him, and not go home at night and just be Uncle Tay. I want to be the dad, That hurts sometimes, but it's not jealousy. It's not me. Yeah, it's just it's just a tinge of sadness sometimes when you're around things that you want so bad. But I don't think the answer is to avoid those people. I think being around those things remind you that you're alive, and they remind you of what's important and what you should strive for. This person says, just listen to your heartbreak episode. Any advice for letting go of hope? They said had a very similar situation. No, not really. My advice for letting go of hope. I say don't let go of hope. But hope will naturally, when you're going through stuff, it will naturally slip away and fade away. And it's up to you to hold on to it and to chase hope. I think you have to chase hope. When do you start to struggle with singleness? At what age? I don't know. Age 8, age 9. When my friends have girlfriends at recess and I don't. No. That's different for everyone, you know? I think for me, my age was never the main issue. It was just me wanting to be in love and not being in love. And I think with age, that feeling exacerbates because it's a distended feeling. It's a protracted feeling. But, you know, I think it's different for everybody. I think some people will start to feel it just as an adult more heavily because maybe you have more experience, maybe you're more sensitive to things, and some people it's not a priority for a while, so they won't really feel it till they're in their 30s or their 40s or whatever. But yeah, I don't think there's a certain specific age where it starts to be hard. I think it just depends on what you've been through. Do you believe in one soulmate for life or many, and it's who you choose to work at it with? I've talked about soulmates before. I kind of go back and forth because I don't think there's one fixed person for you out there that's your soulmate, and if you mess it up, you're screwed. You're without soulmate now. And there's also spiritual, religious components that I believe in and I think about, and those aren't, those are a little bit nebulous as well, but then I see people that are together and I'm like, man, those guys are soulmates. And so I think ultimately my answer is I feel like we have kind of a handful of soulmates. And maybe that's just, that handful is based off of, your life and your geography and where you live and who you associate with. And so it ultimately is kind of a handful. But, if you had endless years and you lived all over the world and, you spent 20 or 30 years in hundreds of different places, I think you'd have hundreds of soulmates. But I think, it's somewhat limited. I don't think the odds are my soulmate doesn't live in India or China, and it's not that I wouldn't be open to somebody that lives there, but the odds are I'm never going to meet them. And the odds are I'm not going to date somebody that doesn't speak English. And the odds are I'm not going to date somebody that is completely outside of my religious paradigm, so your soulmates become, your possibilities for soulmates decrease. But yeah, I don't think there's one, and I don't think there's many. I think there's a few. How do you think you know when someone's the one? I think sometimes that's easier to say looking back, after you're already together or after you break up. It's easy to be like, that was the moment I knew, or that's the moment where things changed. And I think some people have a specific epiphanic moment, and I think other people it's a slower burn. And for me, I'll tell you, there's maybe been 3 girls, like I said, a few. And I'm not saying these girls were my soulmates. I'm saying they could have been, had things gone a little bit differently, had they felt a little bit differently, had circumstances changed. These 3 girls, I think, maybe could have been soulmates. And with each of them, I could pinpoint certain nights, certain experiences that felt like, man, this could be the one. And the thing is, because they didn't work out, those moments, you could argue I never had a moment where I realized they were the one, because they weren't the one. But I think in those few really special bonds and connections I had, I could tell pretty darn quick that there was something different, and that I just wanted to be around this person as much as possible. And, one of the signs of love is obsessive thinking. You start to think about somebody obsessively. You want to know their history. You want to know what they're thinking, what they're doing. You want to touch them all the time. You become obsessed. And I think that's kind of your sign that you're starting to fall for somebody, is you just become obsessed with that human. And it's not in a creepy, weird way where you become, codependent, or you lose sight of yourself, but you become obsessed with their soul, and that's when, to me, that's your sign. And I think for some people it happens really quick, so it feels like love at first sight or whatever. But yeah, I think when you start to become obsessed with their soul, that's when you know that maybe they aren't the one, but maybe they could be the one. Have any of the women in your book recognized that you were talking about them? This would only be in my first book. It's kind of a memoir about love and dating and relationships, and I wrote it when I was 25, and so they were my young early relationships, and I of course changed all their names. And I would have to assume if any of them read it, they would know exactly who I was talking about, but I don't know who read it. I think had those girls read it, they probably wouldn't tell me. Mostly because most of the main girls I talked about are married now, or were married when I wrote the book. So even if they did read it, which I don't think they would, I don't think they would be compelled to, reach out to me and let me know that, hey, is this me you're talking about? It'd be like, yeah, obviously, But my next forthcoming novel, there might be some girls that I write about that are a little more hard to figure out, because they're slightly based on someone, or there are certain aspects of that person that I wrote about. So that might be more of a challenge. Okay, just a few more, I promise. This is a question I feel like I've touched on in this episode, and certainly on others, but I love this question. It just says, what makes you feel alive? And I think for me personally, it's usually touching human interaction that makes me feel alive. I'll tell you what, the other day is my buddy's birthday. We had like 12 dudes stay up at a cabin for a weekend, and it's kind of like this yearly boys trip we do, and we play golf, and we play pickleball, and we watch movies, and we eat out, and we go to dinner, and we hot tub, and we just chill, and it's great. There's nothing like a boys trip. But we were hot tubbing one night, and I don't know actually I do know who brought it up, but it felt pretty random. But someone was like, hey, let's go around and say like one thing that has made us really happy lately, something we're grateful for, something that brings us joy, but it's kind of recent, And there's some beautiful things said, and we're a very open, vulnerable group of dudes. But one of my buddies, who's a more recent friend, and he's a lot younger than all of us, but he married one of our best friend's sisters, and he's just been kind of grafted in, and and he's become one of the guys, genuinely. And he said, and it's funny, he's the kind of dude that he's down to go there. He's down to be open and vulnerable, but it's not what he's used to. It's not his natural state. And so I think he likes it, but it makes him a little uneasy. And he said that he had been struggling with friendships and some of his old friends, feeling like they were moving in different directions, and he had prayed to meet some new good guys, to meet some new friends. And he said, and he realized that we were it. We were the guys he had been praying for. And man, did that make me feel alive. Because it was just this shared moment of joy. And I was so happy for him, and happy he shared, and happy to have been part of it, happy to have been part of that answer to his prayer. Like, those are the things that make me really feel alive, is human connection. And I could answer this question all day. A sunset at the end of the day will make me feel alive. An especially juicy bite of a cheeseburger could make me feel alive. But these little moments with humans is what gets me, and art. I'll read a line in a book about unrequited love, and I'll feel alive. I'll read a line about winds sweeping through a field in rural Illinois, and I'll feel alive, because it'll just paint a picture in my brain, and that makes me feel alive. Music does it. Yeah, I love that question. That's the kind of question you should ask on a first date, not what's your favorite color. This is a question that I essentially answered before. It says how to manage the heartache that maybe I won't find my partner. Yeah, I've essentially answered this, but I think you will find your partner. This same person also said, how do you get over the feeling that maybe you've been forgotten in people's lives? That's hard. I think, looking at our own lives, we always tend to be the main character, and we forget that, and that's okay. We are the main character, and the universe revolves around us and our thoughts and our paradigms and our viewpoints. But the same goes for everyone else. So I think it's hard to not take it personal when you feel like someone has kind of forgotten about you, and they put less priority on the relationship, and you've kind of slipped through the cracks. But I think usually you don't know all the reasons why, and you don't know all the things that person's going through, and maybe why you've been forgotten. But I think if that relationship is important to you, you be the person that reaches out and rekindles things, and reminds people who you are and what you're about. And if they don't, after that, if they aren't receptive, then that sucks, but you don't want that person in your life anyway. But don't be resentful of people that struggle to maintain relationships and maintain contact, and because that's a skill. That's a specific skill that not everyone has. How do you discover or find something new? Or no. Have you discovered or found something new this year that has brought you joy or more clarity? Trying to think of something specific. I think I've had some conversations in the past month, honestly, that have brought me a lot of clarity and a lot of healing. And they've mostly just been with really, really loving people that have kind of cracked open my brain a little bit to see things that maybe I wasn't ready to see before, and have brought some clarity in. And man, those are moments you need, and moments you should cherish. But Yeah. How do you cope with the loneliness of the void while you wait? Um, yeah, that's kind of something I've talked about a lot actually in this episode. But yeah, once again, I'll say it's not easy, and it's okay to just admit sometimes that you're lonely and you're sad. And I think, on some of these clips I've done talking about loneliness or sadness, I'll go through the comments, and there's crazy things people are sharing and admitting, and you realize that you're not alone in being alone. Like, a lot of people struggle with that, and so, like I've said before, when you're really lonely, the best medicine is to go help somebody who's also lonely or even lonelier than you to feel loved and a part of something. What are 3 of your favorite things this month? Events, music, books, etc. I'll tell you what, I started listening to Gracie Abrams' new album, and I love it so much. I've always been a Taylor Swift fan, and she was featured on one of her songs. Taylor was featured on one of her songs, so I heard that one. I was like, oh, that's nice. And then I just started digging in, and her album that just came out a few months ago is absolutely incredible. And there's like 6 songs that I just have on repeat, and beautiful, beautiful lyrics. And so that's been a new favorite thing this month. And let's see, events, I've gone to a couple concerts, eaten at some awesome restaurants. I finally ate at this steakhouse called Fleming's in Salt Lake City. That was amazing. Books, I'm rereading Infinite Jest, which is my favorite novel of all time. And it's like 1,100 pages. It's a mammoth tome. But because it's a very difficult and dense book, rereading it's been awesome because there's so much you missed the first time. That's it, guys. Those were some amazing questions, and it's crazy how the themes kind of find themselves. These are questions that are on people's hearts, and so I'm happy to do my best to try to tell you what I've been through and how I've dealt with and coped with things. But life's a struggle, man. Life is a struggle. I want to read this quote that I read the other day that I just found so beautiful, especially as an artist. It's by Helena Bonham Carter. And she said, "I think everything in life is art. What you do, how you dress, the way you love someone, and how you talk. Your smile and your personality, what you believe in and all your dreams, the way you drink your tea, how you decorate your home or party, your grocery list, the food you make, how you're writing books, how your writing looks, and the way you feel. Life is art." And I couldn't agree more profoundly with this quote. I do think that everything you do in life is art. And I think you have to make it so. I think the physical manner in which you accomplish tasks is an art, whether it's the way you vacuum, the way you paint walls, the way you drive, the way you eat lasagna. I think it's artistic. It's a way to express yourself. It's a creative act. I think everything you do is a creative act. And so if you choose to live that way, you can find meaning in everything you do because it's a creative act, because it's an offering to God. Even if it feels deeply trivial, I think it can be that. And I just love that thought. The way you dress is art. The way what you believe in is art. Think about that. What you believe in is art, is a creative act. It's just beautiful. So, yeah, we're going to wrap up. I just want to say one more time how grateful I am to have this platform, to be doing this podcast. Everyone who's listening, people will sometimes ask me this question that kind of bothers me because it feels a little flippant, like maybe they haven't really thought about it. But a lot of people ask me, like, so what's the plan with the podcast? I don't know what they're trying to get at. Like, what's my 5-year plan with the podcast, or what my ultimate, they'll say, like, what's your goal with the podcast? I'm like, what do you want me to say? Like, how many followers I get or how much money I make? Like, those are just cool byproducts of doing something I love. And I want to reach as many people as possible, and I want to do it full time. So making more money is great, but I really just want to make podcasts for the rest of my life. That's my big goal. And so if I ever stop doing podcasts, hopefully it's because there's some crazy new platform that has replaced podcasts. And so it's not called podcasts anymore, and I'm doing some other form of video interview, conversations, whatever. But that's the only difference. Like, I'm going to do this forever, just like I'm going to write books forever. And so my 5-year plan is to just be 5 years better at this. In 5 years, I have 5 years worth of growth and experience. That's it. So, if you're new to the podcast, we do this thing where each week we do what's called an aftercast, and I'll kind of do a mini episode. Essentially, it's usually like 15 minutes long, and I throw those up on Patreon if you want to go check that out. But these episodes are just little recaps, little reflections on episodes, and especially the ones with guests, where I can kind of, a few days later or a few weeks later, sometimes I can sit back and be like, wow, like I loved what we talked about, and I wish maybe we had talked about this, and, kind of give you some behind the scenes on how I got the guest or how we met, and, my thoughts on the episode. So look out for those aftercasts. They're exclusively on Patreon. Sometimes I'll post some clips from them, but the whole episodes will be exclusively on Patreon. So go check those out. And yeah, if you've ever listened to an episode, even bits of an episode, I'm grateful for you. And this is 100. We did it. This is 100 episodes in. I couldn't be happier with the current state of where I am. And that's it. That's 100, baby.